Hey everybody, it's Peter again, and today I am going to assemble a two woofer. You can see the two woofer holes there, open baffle sub flat pack, and this comes from McCormick up in British Columbia, and he ships them all over the United States and maybe other countries too, I don't know. Name of his business is Reference North Audio, but most people probably know him as Captain Hemo on Audio Circle. He cuts these flat packs, the subwoofer flat packs, open baffle subwoofer flat packs. Boy, that's a tongue twister. And he also does all the Audica models and I think some other GR Research models as well. So as always, I'll leave links to where you can send an email to him, and you can contact him about doing a set of these for you if you'd like. So this is the kit basically, but what I wanted to cover first was some things I'm going to use and a couple of little deals that might be useful to you. So I'm going to be using a longer open time glue today. We've both Jay and I have gotten feedback from people who are putting flat packs together, and the speed with which the glue is setting seems to be throwing kind of a curveball. So in order to make that a little easier, this glue should provide everything in terms of strength that you'll ever need, but it slows the whole process down a little bit so you don't have to work so fast. Might not be a big deal on this, but on the XLS kits that I've been cutting, I know some people have gotten into I won't say trouble, but they probably have wished for things to not go quite as fast. If it's the first time you're doing it, it does require that you move quickly. So a new kind of glue, again, that's Titebond, and it's called Extend. And also they make a Type 2 Extend, which is a waterproof glue. No need for that. This hopefully will never see water where it needs waterproof glue. So I buy it in gallons, but you can buy it. Although I haven't seen it, I haven't looked into Home Depot and places like that, and you may have to nose around a little bit to find this, but I think it'll be helpful. So the other things I'm going to use, this bar clamp, that's a pretty standard fare, lots of different brands. This one happens to be an old style Jorgensen, and Jorgensen, by the way, has changed a lot. They used to be an American company, and they went out of business and then got bought by somebody else. They're reproducing these. They're not quite the same, but I think they're probably every bit as good. And then I bought some new clamps that I thought might be useful to pass this information along. These are Bessey clamps, and I actually have quite a few Bessey clamps. German made, nice stuff, lots of copies out there. I don't know them all, but what this is a little bit smaller version of what they call their K-body Revo, which is that right there. And this is a real short one. This is a 12-inch one. So this is just a scaled down version. You can kind of see by that comparison right there. Maybe you can. And watch me knock the grill over. So there's a size comparison between the two. So this is a standard K-body Revo. They call this one a Junior. And anyway, I thought I don't mind adding to my clamp collection, so I bought a couple of these just to see. And they aren't inexpensive, I'll be real honest with you. These clamps none of them are cheap, but I think these were around 40 bucks a piece. So I guess if you're gonna spend that kind of money on clamps, it'll be something that you use more than once. The other thing, okay, so this little package that Jay sends along with the kit has dowels, and it has these cabinet assembly screws. And these are often known as Conformat screws, and they're used a lot in Euro cabinet assembly. And one thing I wanted to point out here that probably a lot of people don't know, and I didn't know for a long time, these screws, or any screws like them, I'm going to get up here and show this to the camera. Hopefully you can see on that head, when these little radial lines are going away from the center of that. That identifies this as what's called a Posidriv screw. It looks like a Phillips, and in many ways it's like a Phillips. I'm going to push that. I don't know how well the camera's going to focus on that. Hopefully you can see that. Anyway, so Posidriv differs from, let me get back here in front of the camera, differs from Phillips in a way that, that most people don't know about. They're just slightly different. Where the crux of that cross is, there's another little V, and what they were supposed to be doing was to give a more positive grip on the screwdriver. So this screw is designed for a number 2 Posidriv, and you can get those in tips like that. You can also buy whole screwdrivers. Probably the easiest thing for most people would be this. Now you can also put it together with a number 2 Phillips. It doesn't fit quite as well, and you have to put pressure on it so you don't spin it when you're assembling. But there's a little about Posidriv screws. This is probably going to send some confusion through the world. But if ever you see those radial lines coming out from the inner part of that cross on a Phillips head screw, that identifies it as a Posidriv. And that's universal as far as I know. You find a lot of Posidriv screws in Euro cabinetry, and that's where this came from. So I'll just be using a hand screwdriver. You could use a power screwdriver if you want to. And glue bottles, you've seen me use those before. So that's it for this. I'm going to get this stuff out of the way and we'll get on to assembly. So catch up with you real quick. Alrighty, we're back here, and I'll point out some of the pieces to you. This is actually a pretty straightforward kit. These are going to be the sides. There is a left and a right, and he marks these. So, and from what Jay tells me, he pre-assembles all these, so dry fits them before he sends them out, which is kind of a nice thing. That way you know it's going to fit. Everything is done on CNC machine, so a lot of it's going to be repeatable. But anyway, so sides, you get a top, you get a bottom or a plinth, depending on how you call that. This is the baffle, and on this baffle, the woofers are designed to both be facing the same direction, and you can identify the front of the baffle by the pilot holes for the drivers to mount into. And then these are the shelf braces that go in the middle of it. So the first thing I'm going to do here is going to put the dowels in both of the sides. Now we're going to do this the way I think Jay does it. Hopefully I'm doing it the way he tells people. It might be a little bit out of sequence. So these dowels will go into these holes on both the top and the bottom. But initially, we're only going to glue the bottom. I'm going to put the sides onto the top with what's called a dry dowel. So I think the easiest way to probably do that is to put the dowels in the sides first, and then we'll assemble one side dry, one side wet. And what I'm doing here, I'm just putting a drop of glue in that hole. This is not critical that you get gobs and gobs of glue in. And one thing that is critical, hang on a sec, needed to get a hammer, is if you get glue squeezing out and it's going to be the surface that goes to here, I would say let it dry first, because you want this to stay loose. And I hope that makes sense. So I just pulled that dowel out, and I would say, for lack of a better way of describing it, a pencil eraser's worth of glue in there should be plenty. And you can do both ends. The dowels are primarily there to locate things. The strength is going to come from the actual glue joint. And you'll see here something I should probably point out. The dowels are not evenly spaced here, so there is a front and a back to these. And like I said, he marks them. The way he's got these set up, the area, or I should say the side with the greater distance from the dowel to the front is the front of the cabinet. So there's one down, one to go. And again, about a pencil eraser's worth. And these I'm pushing in with my finger. I could push them, I could hammer them in there. There's no need to get crazy with them. If they're a little tight, you can tap them in, but it doesn't require anything. And the glue will, as it runs down the side of that hole, will provide enough. These dowels are designed, they have ribs on them, which might be kind of hard to see in the video, but they're designed to relieve. If you should get a bunch of excess glue in there, they will actually relieve that glue out through those ridges. So again, now I didn't get any, but if you put so much glue in there that you had glue oozing out around here, I would say wipe it off and let them dry. What you don't want to do is when you go to assemble this, you don't want this surface to have glue on it because this is going to be left to glue up later on. So I'm going to let that sit just a little bit and let that glue set, and just a minute or two, and then we'll come back and we'll begin assembly, which should be really straightforward. I like to do it up on table because I don't like kneeling on floors much anymore, and especially a concrete one like this. So, but this could be done on a floor if you don't have a big table you can work on. So back in a few. Okay, I've given those dowels just a couple of minutes to set. They are going to bottom out in those holes. You wouldn't have to take that time. And the holes look to be plenty deep in the top and bottom, so there should be no issue of those bottoming out and preventing them from going together. So the next thing we're going to do is, if you've watched my videos before, you've seen me spread glue around with an acid brush. And the key here, one of the keys, again, we're using slow setting glue, and I even wrote it on there. This is just so I can identify it in the shop here. But this is a part where you need to be kind of quick. It doesn't have to be rushed, but it needs to be a positive kind of motion forward that you don't get in the midst of and realize you've forgotten something. So I would say, dry fit this, put it together. If there's any doubt in your mind how it's going to work, do it once without any glue and then take it apart and glue it. Better that than to get in the middle of it and realize you've forgotten something. So the key here, and I'm going to do this a little bit differently. If you watch my assembly video on the XLS's, you saw me make a lot of noise about getting glue up on the vertical edge of these rabbets and dados. It's less critical here. There's so much glue area that to get 100% glue coverage on every part of that joint, first of all, I think it's going to cause you some problems because the pieces won't insert in there very easily with glue. And secondly, it's going to slow things down to the point where I think it's just going to make things harder, and it's not going to be any benefit in the end game. So for whatever it's worth, I can tell you, when I was working in cabinet shops, we never spread glue with a brush, never. And we always just squirted it right out of the bottle and assembled the parts and assumed that whatever pressure or joint was there, it would, when it was clamped up, it would squeeze that glue to the areas that need to be. Now that's in a production environment and probably not the very best way to do it, but the gobs of glue, again, back to my whole thing about glue squeezing outside the joint, doesn't do anything except generate a mess as far as I'm concerned. So we're going to put glue here, here, there, there. Then we're going to assemble it. You'll see me put the shelves in, or the baffle and then the shelves. So away we go. And I'm going to squirt that glue right up in that corner between the vertical edge, what's now the vertical edge, and the horizontal surface. And I'm going to do it both on the center baffle and also the braces. So having that run down the side into the bottom of this dado will be fine, but I wouldn't waste a lot of time trying to get a real thick coating everywhere. And by the way, this is the first time I'm doing this, so I am doing this. I always judge stuff based on past experience, and I want it wet with glue, but it doesn't need to be dripping with glue. Like I said, there is so much glue area on this that it's not all that important. Oh, and one thing I should mention while I'm doing this, like I said, Jay marks the tops of these and the front. So this is the top right here. So I'm going to be assembling this upside down. I should have mentioned that. And you want to hold the glue back. Hang on a second. So you want to hold the glue back a little from this top. You don't want this squeezing out and gluing that top. The top is, again, this is a dry fit. This is a dry dowel. So we're going to glue that later. And so I would say hold your glue back about 1 inch from that. And I'm wiping some out with my finger there because, again, this is my first time, so I'm learning too. So if I make mistakes, you get to learn from them. Just like I do, I guess. So I held that back a little there. So I'm running glue. Hopefully you can see that. I'm running glue kind of up in the crux of where the horizontal surface meets the vertical. A bead on each side, and then a bead in the center. And I hope that's obvious to the camera. You can kind of see how much glue I'm using. And I'm not taking a lot of time because it's sort of critical that you move quickly at this point. Not frantic, but quick, which seems to be a point of distinction for me anyway. So up here near the top, I'm pulling all that glue into the center rather than having it squeeze out down here. And you'll see that in just a second. Let me set that brush down. Oops, I forgot an area here. And glue, if you get some squeezing out of the joints, there's two things that you can kind of do. You can let it squeeze out and then figure you'll get it off later, or in this case, I'm not a huge fan of wet ragging, but you can take a damp rag and you can wipe it off. If you're going to paint them, it's probably no big deal, but wet on wood will always raise not much grain in MDF, but it will certainly roughen up the surface. So we're going to set that aside. And remember, this is dry. So this is the top. This is upside down at this point. And he's got these marked. So front is here, and then I'm going to take the baffle. And you know, in this case, now you might have these a couple of different ways. Some, including mine on the Exoticas I built, have one forward-facing and one rear-facing woofer. This particular one was cut so both of the woofers face front. The roundover always goes towards the back. The pilot holes always go towards the front. So what I'm doing there, I'm just sliding that into the dado. And I'm going to, so I stood one side up, and the dowels will really help out here because they will locate this for you. You just pull and let that fall into those dowel holes. Pull that together, and I'm actually going to pull this apart a little bit. This is a tip that Jay told me. And, on these, you'll notice this has holes, and that's going to go towards the back in this case because this is where your wires will run up to the upper woofer. So you want that in the back. And what I'm doing, this may not be real obvious from the camera angle. Oh, I forgot glue in one spot. By the way, so you want to run a little bit of glue right on this area where that's going to be going up against the baffle. And that does not need to be a lot of glue because it'll squeeze out and just generate a mess for you, I think, if you. So I just push that in, and again, these are spread apart just a little bit. And I'm going to do the same thing on the front. And in this case, Jay has drilled these from the back side, and this has a magnet that's sunk clear down to here, and that'll be for the grill you see over there. So this is going to go up against the baffle. So a little bit of glue there. And because I had those parts, so you can see how that just slides right in, and these are pulled apart a little bit. So that stage of the game. You're going to use a little clamp. This does not need to be clamped tight. Snug is the name of the game here. So I'm just pulling those together, and all I want that to do is to pull these two up against the baffle. Lots of pressure there just isn't necessary. Now, pull these in, and I'm going to glue this, and I am just going to run a bead of glue. So here I am taking my own advice and ignoring it, and not going to spread this glue around. I'm just going to run a bead. That's about an 1/8 inch bead. Gravity will do most of the work here. I mean, this thing isn't going to be flying through the air, so you don't need to go crazy with glue. When it squeezes out, it just makes it really hard to get out of there, and depending on how you're going to assemble them. So here we got, I hope this is all showing up. This is the front, and you can see that the holes that are drilled here, the bias is towards the back. Hope that makes sense. So in any case, you've got, pay no attention to what I just said. He writes front on it. So we know this is the front, this is the front, this is the front. So this now is the front. Line up with the dowel holes. And you've got dowel holes and screw holes. They look the same on the side that's facing down right now, but the holes for the screws are smaller where the pilot's holes are in here. So I'm just lining that up, pushing it down. Oh, I forgot one thing. It probably isn't all that important, but a little bit of glue in these dowel holes. And just remember that you're doing it in the dowel hole and not the so the dowel holes will be these and these. If it seems like I don't know what I'm doing, it is my first time. So I am just putting glue in those outermost holes and getting it all over the place, as you can see. All right, back to it as he drops his glue brush on the floor. Okay. All right. Now, this is where the conformat screws come in. So you don't need any clamps here because these screws are going to pull that down, and these go in from the bottom, and he's got them countersunk into the bottom. So if you decide to put anything on the bottom of this, they won't be in the way. Guess I'll pick up my brush while I'm at it. And again, that tip is a number 2 Posidriv. You could do it with a regular Phillips. Probably nobody would know the difference, but for real positive engagement on that screw head, that is kind of nice to have. And I'm in this habit of, this is probably something from my mechanic in past, of going in and get everything snug first, and then actually tightening it down in another round. That way you make sure that this is all down tight on the sides there. This is a pretty neat screwdriver. I got this a long time ago when I was wrenching. That's actually got a ratchet mechanism in it. Snap-on makes some great tools, but as I recall, that was a really expensive screwdriver. I don't know if I'd buy it again. That's when I was wrenching for a living. So with most screws like this, snug is where you want it. Reefing on stuff, you're talking about threading into MDF. So the need for reefing just isn't there. All you need to do is pull this down tight. The glue's going to hold it, and if that's assuming I can get it. All right. So we're good there. And the only other thing I'm going to clamp at this point, these are clamped together. I'm going to roll this around so you can see that. So these are clamped up against the baffle, and then I'm going to take these clamps and I'm going to lightly pull these sides together. And remember, that's dry. Dry meaning there's no glue on it. And if you've done everything right, these should come out real flush here. And then if you've ordered grills, I think these are an option. I think everything that Jay provides. So you can see the magnets in there. And remember, those other magnets are buried in here. And he does them that way because if you paint, sometimes these magnets can create a problem. If you're doing something like Duratex, it just wouldn't be an issue. So that actually goes on there like that. And it just stuck to my clamp. Spin that around so I can see it. And there, I've got a little bit of glue squeezing out. There's just a tiny bit right there. I'm looking around. I got another little bit right here. Right there you can see. And what happened there is I slid that thing in. It pushed some glue in front of it and needs somewhere to go. And there's enough slack in these holes or these dados that if things need to if it needs to relieve some glue somewhere, it's going to do it up alongside there, just like that did. And I'm kind of funny. I'll leave that until it not gets completely hard, but about halfway there, in about maybe 30 or 45 minutes, that glue will be semi-hard, and it's real easy. I'm going to grab this just a second. So I have an old chisel that all I use it for is to scrape glue off. And if you try and do it now, the glue is going to get spread around a lot. And you all know how fussy I am about glue, right? So I would leave that for a while. And now you can, rest assured this is going to dry, but we're going to have to flip it over once this is dry. Jay likes to see 4 hours dry time, which probably isn't a bad idea. I would look at it and say, no reason to rush. Rushing in any kind of a project like this usually gets you an end result that you might not want. So there we have it. It's clamped up. The top, or the bottom now, this is upside down, is all nice and tight, and we'll let that dry. Then we'll come back, unclamp it, flip it over, and glue the top on. And I'm also going to do an amp box, which is, you can maybe see those. I don't know if the camera sees over there or not. Anyway, those are a miter with a biscuit joint in them. Really easy to put together. So that's it for now. We'll come back after a few hours and we'll glue the top on. So see you then. Alrighty, folks, we are back. Well, I am back. And this has been clamped up for about 4 hours. So the glue should be plenty strong at this point to kind of horse it around. And I realize that these things are heavy. So when you're moving them, and we'll be flipping this over, it's probably a good idea to have that clamp time, because it could almost tear itself apart if the glue wasn't good and set. And that just has to do with not how you move it so much as how much it weighs and pressure it's going to put on itself. So take the clamps off. Oh, a couple things I should probably mention again. So these holes that you see in the brace right there and right there are going to be in the back. So they should be, and this is both woofers facing forward. So the roundover is going to be on the back on both of these, and then the wires would, if you probably would drill a hole here for the, or maybe put some sort of a bracket here for the connector, and then the wires would come up to this woofer, then go up through the hole, and you're going to have sensing wires on one side and the signal wires on the other. So enough said about that. We'll take clamps off. And we should be able to flip this over. Now, I'm not sure how the top's going to act when we do this, so you'll get to see as fast as I do, I guess. So I'm going to set that aside. I'm going to grab the bottom of this and just roll it. So no surprises there. Now, there we go. So that just pops right off. And remember, we didn't put any glue up near the ends of this. So potentially, if you got glue near the end, it would have squeezed out there and glued this thing down, which you don't want. Conceivably, you could glue this all up in one shot, but when Jay tells me that they've had lots of experience doing this, I believe him. And as far as I'm concerned, there's nothing to be gained by doing that. I mean, maybe you gain a little bit of time, but I guess I'd always encourage you to take your time anyway. So now I think one thing I should probably show you, this might be confusing to people. You'll see these holes right here. Well, those would be for screw holes. If this were the bottom, I imagine that Jay puts all those holes in either side. So it could be the top or the bottom, but we're going to use the dowel holes, obviously, but not the screw holes. That way you don't have screws running in the top. So from here, pretty easy. We're just going to glue this, glue here, glue across there, glue there, and then clamp the top down lightly. Again, you don't need a whole lot of pressure here. Just clamp it from the shelf up and you'll see. So I'm going to hold back from the edges a little bit. And run a bead of glue, and that's about an 1/8 inch bead of glue. And I'm not going to spread this out. I'm going to go against my own advice here. Like I said, there's so much glue area on here that having glue squeezing out all over the place just isn't going to help matters much. And if you've watched my videos, you know I'm all about that. So add a little there where it looked like it might be a little light. And believe it or not, once we clamp that, that'll probably get within a 1/4 inch of the edge, which will be plenty of glue area. Again, he's marked the front, so we're front here, front top here, left, or I should say front top here, and those are Jay's marks that he put in there. So all we need to do is set this down on the dowels. What's cool about doing it this way is you can set it up and it's perched up on those dowels, so you can just slide it until you get alignment. And there you go. It's going to pop right on there. You don't have to worry about glue running all over the place. So here again, you could probably use a different kind of clamp if you wanted to. I'll go ahead and use these parallel clamps. I have a lot of bar clamps that I used to use, and that's what we used in the cabinet shops I worked in. And but since I've been doing this on my own, parallel clamps do some really nice things because they don't pinch right at the jaw point. Let me point that out to you. So a bar clamp will tend to put a lot of pressure right there, where a parallel clamp theoretically clamps evenly all along this surface. And I really think that's helpful in some cases. So I've kind of switched over to these. If I'm doing big glue ups, sometimes I'll use the bar clamps just because I need more clamps. And what I'm doing right now is I'm just looking through here to make sure that I've got everything down snug. And you could clamp this other ways. If you, I suppose if you had some long clamps, you could set this up on some blocks and get your clamp underneath here and clamp down there. Again, clamping pressure is not the key here. The weight of this is going to do most of the work. Honestly, I don't think you'd need a whole lot of clamping, but we're doing it anyway. And I'm going to move this over. What I'm seeing here is just a little bit of a gap there. So I just want to make sure that I'm fully seated everywhere. And would appear that I am. So I'm looking in there, I'm seeing a little tiny glue squeeze out right here, and I would look at something like this and say, rather than having to take all that glue squeeze out, you're not going to gain anything in strength by having it come let's say the last 1/8 of an inch or something from the edge back in there. There's just so much strength there to begin with. And knowing that if you were to put this under some kind of torture test, the glue line wouldn't be the part to fail, the wood itself would be. So you just don't need gobs and gobs of glue. And that's my mantra, if you haven't figured that out already. So that is good to go. We leave that for, 4 hours, I guess. If you wanted to handle a lot, probably an hour would be plenty if you just wanted to do some additional work on it. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to push this aside, and I'm going to get the amp box up here, and we'll put it together. Real simple little assembly there, but I'm going to push this and get a piece of MDF up here that I can that's nice and flat, and I can assemble it on there. So be back in just a second. Alrighty, now it's amp box time. So I got a scrap of MDF here so I don't get glue on the surface of my table. Not that it would be a big deal, but I keep scraps around. Just this is kind of sacrificial lambs. So here's what you've got with the amp box. You've got 2 sides, a front and a back, or I guess a side. Doesn't really matter. I guess it depends on how you're installing it. This hole would be for the connector that runs. That's called a I can't remember the name of that connector. Anyway, it goes on here and actually would run over to your speaker box from the amplifier. So this has what's called a biscuit joint, and a biscuit joint is just a little saw blade that makes this slot, and then these things that are called biscuits slide in there and they glue in place. My understanding is these things are made from beech and they're compressed, and when they get wet from glue they actually expand. So these things have been around forever and ever. The very first cabinet shop I worked at had one of these, and at the time Lamello, which happens to be the brand of these, had a patent on them, and then when that patent ran out, everybody came to the market, Porter Cable, DeWalt, everybody had a biscuit joiner, and they're maybe a little passé now with other things around, but they're real effective for doing this kind of stuff, and they align joints like these really well and keep the joint from sliding. So you don't need a lot of pressure to glue this. You'll hear me repeat that theme a lot. So the way to go with these is you got to stick I think the easiest way, and I usually, when I put these in, I'm sliding that along and making the glue sort of stick to the side of that. I don't know if that's very evident or not, but you don't want to get a ton of glue. Does that seem like I repeat myself a lot? Anyway, I just kind of get enough in there that when I slide that thing into place, that I don't have a bunch of glue oozing out all over the place. I want it to be wet with glue, but not all over the place. And one thing that's cool about these is their positioning isn't really critical because the joint will slide back and forth. So they align in one way, but they don't restrict movement in the other way. So we will continue on here, and I'll quit gabbing. I really like biscuits. They're really good for aligning things, and although they do add a fair amount of strength, especially in a deal like this where you have MDF against MDF, that joint wouldn't be really strong, but having that biscuit in there makes a lot of difference. So I'm getting glue in the biscuit hole, biscuit slot, and then I'm also going to put a little bit of glue on the face of that. And I'm definitely going against what I said in another video about spreading the glue out with a brush, and I realize that. This is just this kind of a deal where it's not going to make that much difference. I almost hate to say that because it sounds like a compromise, but it's really not. So same thing here. Hopefully you can see that. So I'm getting some in the joint and 2 lines of glue on either side. This just won't see any stress. I mean, this is going to be sitting on the floor. Your amp's going to be screwed onto it. The need for gigantic strength here just isn't huge. So the top is the same as the bottom, and there's some glue that just ran out of there because I'm gabbing. But the thing to do is to get these partially in place and then pull it together. And you could pull it together with your hands. You're moving kind of diagonally when you do that. And so the way I typically do this is I push it together with my hands. And I look for gaps. If there's gaps, then that might tell me where I need to put a clamp. And what I'm seeing is gaps on the other side here. So what I'm going to do, there's a lot of ways to clamp miters, but when they're held together by those biscuits, you can be pretty carefree about how you do it. So I'm just putting a tiny bit of pressure on that, and what that's for is to keep these from sliding this direction. If I put a lot of pressure this way, the tendency for that joint would want to be to push these out. The biscuit will hold it, to a large extent, but we're kind of playing the odds here. And I might do something else. So if it seems like I'm being wishy-washy here, it's just because I want to do it the way I want to do it. And I'm mostly letting the what I'm seeing here in the way of the glue joint tighten it up. And what you want, I might have not been very clear about this, what you want is that miter to meet up evenly all the way up and down. If you can misalign it like this by putting a lot of excess pressure on, so be mindful of that when you're doing this. And you can kind of counteract that. If your misalignment is trying to push this piece that direction, then you can tighten up that other clamp a little bit. And when I say tighten, I'm talking about very small amounts of pressure. This is where a parallel clamp actually works pretty well too, because, and I'm just doing a little bit of a alignment on the box there, because where these clamps put pressure right where the clamp foot and the head is, a parallel clamp theoretically clamps along its whole length of its jaw. So I'm seeing a little bit of glue squeeze out here. Now, there's a critical thing that has to happen right now. Nothing is really holding this square. I could have the clamps on a little cockeyed or something like that, and there's a couple of ways you can check for square. You can do it with a tri-square, something like that. You can put it on the inside. Well, that assumes it would fit. Let's do it on the outside. So what I'm doing is sticking that in there, and I'm looking at this. Even though it doesn't fit down inside, I can look down this blade and see if it's out of alignment. If it's aligned on one side, it should be aligned on the other, theoretically. And that actually looks pretty good. But I'm going to show another technique here that works just as well, and that is measuring it. So to measure for square, you're measuring diagonals, and these should measure exactly the same. And if it's out of square, if it's racked like that, one side will measure longer than the other. And the only thing you have to be able to get to is you need to pull off the corner with the blade of your tape measure. And that is 16 5/8 plus a smidgen. That is exactly right. So that's another way you can check for square. You want to do that because the amp plate is going to be square, and you don't want this to be cattywampus on there, right? We don't want anything cattywampus. So I'm just moving those clamps down so they're putting pressure more in the center, eyeballing my joints again, and that's it. So leave that to dry, and again, I'm using that slow set glue. I think this is something I'll recommend to everybody now. It might be a little hard to find, but for first time glue ups, I mean, if you're not accustomed to working fast with glue ups, I think the slowness of this would be a real benefit. Without any real downside, except you're going to have to wait a little longer. Although they do say this sets in 30 minutes, which is the same as Titebond 1. So I don't know what to make of that, but it definitely does dry slower. I mean, I can see it when I go to scrape glue and stuff like that, and that should be a benefit. When a glue up like this, not that big a deal. If you were doing triples or quads in that slow set time would be a benefit. So I'll probably start using this more in the shop, and since I have a gallon of it, and just figure on letting things sit a little longer, which has never been a problem for me, I guess. And that's it, folks. we'll take that out of the clamps and it's ready for paint at that point. I didn't show you this, but there's magnets embedded right there, and they align with these magnets. So this grill, this would be what you'd cover with grill cloth, and sits down into these rabbets on either side and is held on by those magnets. Pretty slick deal, and you don't see any of it, which is kind of the beauty of neomagnets anyway. So there you have it. If you were doing this for yourself, you'd probably have another one of those, and from there you do whatever you're going to finish it in. It could be Duratex, could be paint. There probably are some other choices. Veneer would not be a possibility with these edges rounded over like this. You're never going to get veneer to roll over that in two directions. You could get it to go one way, but then getting the other way would be the hard part. So that's it for now. I'm going to cut it off at this point. You know I have a tendency to ramble, so, and I always say the same thing. I'm going to cut it off here. I really am. This is going to be hopefully a pretty short video once I get it edited, and then maybe this will help some of you subwoofer builders out a little bit. So I'll see you next go, and until then, pay attention to all the stuff that's being said about the coronavirus. I think it's important that we follow some of the guidelines about staying safe there. So stay safe, everybody, and I'll see you next go.